Alright, so my good pal and sometimes mortal enemy during our weekly edition of Fanboy Wars on the 8-Bit Podcast, the Sainted Magnus posted a video this past week where he itemized the top 10 video games that define him as a gamer, and seeing as he implored his viewership to post their own video responses, I've now elected to respond in kind. Without further elucidation, the top 10 games that define me as a gamer. I think you'll be surprised by some of the titles that made and didn't make the cut. Alright, now if we're going to talk about games that define me, I think we have to start with a seminal work. Clearly, the most important game in my existence, Final Fantasy... Nah, I'm just fucking with you guys. Anyways, I'm hitting 88 miles per hour to Winnebago to start things off here, and taking you back to the year 1996, to the uncontested pinnacle of the superb Kirby series, Kirby motherfucking Superstar, alright? The absurdly and suggestively titled Kirby's Fun Pack for the cheese-eating surrender monkeys over in Europe. I'm only teasing. And sure, it's a great game, but why does Kirby Superstar define me as a gamer, you ask? Well, because simply put, it essentially validated my purchase of a Super Nintendo, or my parents' purchase of a Super Nintendo, back in 1995, and slowly but surely began my gradual transformation into a flag-waving Nintendo loyalist. And though the scales have since fallen from my eyes, I still have a soft, mushy place in my soiled undergarments for the big N. Nigeria. Fucking Nintendo, asshole. I think my buddy wants to help me do number 10, or number 9, rather. Actually, number 9 is a bit of a dark horse for me. Splinter Cell, and I know you're thinking Chaos Theory, which I do love, and it's a great game, but I'm going to have to go with the terminally underrated Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow. This is the game that, without going into too much detail, first showed me that you could fit like a Thief-esque atmospheric shadow-based like stealth game onto a console without shoehorning obnoxious Metal Gear Solid shooting gallery sequences into the game. And why do I like this game better than Chaos Theory, you ask? Well, 2 words, alright? SWAT turn. Where the fuck did that feature go after Pandora Tomorrow? You mean to tell me Sam Fisher, at age 65 or whatever the fuck, can plop down from straddling a pipe 15 feet in the goddamn air onto some oblivious Russian shitbag's larynx and smash it like a Cadbury cream egg in the process, but he can't do a SWAT turn when he changes from cover point to cover point? Yeah. You have fun with Uncharted, the Stealth Edition. I'll be playing motherfucking Pandora Tomorrow. Now, obviously, you want to use the PC version if at all possible, and this is almost a gimme. But Deus Ex. Alright, I just kind of like this cover more. I do have the PC version of the Game of the Year edition, but I like this cover better, personally. And as I mentioned earlier, but wasn't able to fully expound upon during the confines of my Deus Ex retrospective, there's a few things in the PS2 version of the game that weren't in the PC version, but probably should have been. I obviously mentioned the remixed orchestral, main title theme. It fucking rules, and it should be in the Game of the Year edition of the fucking game, no excuses. The other thing is, the wonky mouth movement in the PC version, how everyone looks like they just had cosmetic surgery or some shit, and there's a trained puppeteer off camera operating their ass-fat injected jowls? Yeah. Well, in the PS2 version, they actually replaced that shitty movement with just like basic Star Fox style open close mouth movement, and as simplistic as that sounds, it actually looks at like 5,000 times better. If Deus Ex fans want to patch something, patch that shit into the game, alright? Alright, and this one could probably be higher on the list, but it's going on there regardless. People will always say 2 belongs on there because it was harder and it had more features, and that's true, but for me, the pinnacle of the series came right out of the gate with the original Donkey Kong Country. I've mentioned it in passing on the 8-Bit Podcast, but I only ever purchase a Nintendo console when there's a sufficiently badass Donkey Kong game on said console. And while I did own and play the original arcade port on NES, along with Donkey Kong Jr., it was really Donkey Kong Country that cemented that trend going forward. After that point, I went ahead and bought Donkey Kong 64. I avoided the GameCube because fuck Donkey Konga and their Blink-182 advertisements in fucking 2004, at least 4 years after anyone without an inoperable brain tumor gave a fuck about him, and the unbridled badassery of Donkey Kong Country Returns ensures that I'll eventually own a Nintendo Wii. In my opinion, when you talk about the exceptional genius of Rare Studios, you can keep your Banjo-Kazooie and your Perfect Dark and your GoldenEye. It all started with Donkey Kong Country, folks. This game still looks amazing by today's standards. The gameplay is smooth and fast and responsive. The soundtrack may well be the single greatest video game OST of all time, and that goes for all 3 Donkey Kong Country games, by the by. So play it or go fuck yourself. Number 6 is Wing Commander. Obviously, this is another case where you're going to want to go with the PC version in lieu of the SNES port, although for the record, the SNES port really isn't bad. They did a great job bringing this seminal spaceflight sim to home consoles, especially a console that was as technically limited as the Super Nintendo was. Regardless, I lack the superlatives to explain how fucking amazing this series is. If there's one genre I'd love to see resurrected in the modern day, it's the oft-neglected, fun-as-fuck space sim genre. Oh, I mean, there's a few here and there. I own, Darkstar 1. Darkstar 1 for the Xbox 360 and home PC being a perfect example of a modern spaceflight sim done well. But with a budget and a genuine creative vision, this genre could rule the fucking world. They're fun single player, they're a fucking blast multiplayer. It's a goldmine just waiting for a savvy prospector to happen by and milk it for all it's worth. And yet Electronic Arts sits idly, sapping every last atom of interest from Mass Effect and Madden. Oh fucking hum. MechWarrior III. Now, as good as Sony first-party exclusives were from the mid-90s to the present, the first-party Microsoft output of the late 90s and the early 2000s beats it like an Atlas fanboy to an artistic dating sim, alright? And this is exactly what I'm referring to. Yeah, you had your Crash Bandicoots, your Twisted Metal, your Legend of Dragoon, Siphon Filter, and 1,000 interchangeable JRPG cutscene orgies. First-party Microsoft, back when they still made fucking games, was responsible for MechWarrior 3 and 4, Asheron's Call, Freelancer, fucking Knights of the Old Republic, Age of Empires, Starlancer, Grabbed by the Ghoul... Nah, I'm just fucking with you. But if you had a working gaming PC in the late 90s and early 2000s like I did, Microsoft Game Studios was the shit. And this game right here perfectly exemplifies that, and I can't tell you how elated I am to see the modern resurrection of the mech genre in games like Hawken and MechWarrior Online. These games are fucking fun. They have a rich fiction culled largely from the only tabletop RPG I give a fuck about, which is, of course, BattleTech. I'll stop gushing right now, but play this shit. At first glance, Westwood's Blade Runner PC game in 1997 is a point-and-click, but it's in the endless replayability and possibly forked narrative that Blade Runner truly excels. This same year that Final Fantasy VII was redefining the term suffocating linearity, Blade Runner was redefining the terms non-linearity and emergent gameplay. It's not just that the game has 13 unique endings, it's the fact that the game you play on the way to uncovering all 13 endings never plays the same twice. And that isn't hyperbolic exaggeration either. Rather than offering you the same story with the same choices each butt-fucking time, a la Heavy Rain, each time you begin a new game, Blade Runner actually randomizes who's a human and who is a replicant, and will even go so far as to randomly place characters in specific locations where they couldn't be found 5 playthroughs ago. In some cases, drastically altering the course of the game's story, meaning that even if you make the exact same set of randomized choices, the result will never be exactly the same. In a lot of ways, Blade Runner is more Deus Ex than Deus Ex, and you should fucking play it. On the surface, the original Breath of Fire is a by-the-numbers JRPG with a somewhat forgettable story, and lamentably that remains the popular appraisal of the game to this day. It deserves far better, however. Admittedly, my perceptions of the game are severely colored by the simple fact that it's the first RPG I ever had the privilege of playing. But when you really dig beneath the surface, there's a very robust and pliable combat system with lush, beautiful graphics, interesting and exotic characters, hailing from interesting and exotic locales, and one of the finest chapters in the obscenely rich library of SNES-era Capcom soundtracks. Really, what more can you ask of an early 90s Japanese RPG? I mean, I'll be honest, one of the things I absolutely detest about Final Fantasy is how insufferably pretentious it is. Even on the Super Nintendo, it felt like Final Fantasy's creators genuinely felt they were crafting an inimitable work of philosophical brilliance. Capcom, on the other hand, they knew from the outset that Breath of Fire was first and foremost a game. They weren't making a Socratic statement, although the story certainly has its own transcendent themes and flashes of narrative brilliance for certain. They wanted to polish the Final Fantasy formula up, and they managed to do so several years before Final Fantasy eventually actually did. Instead of being needlessly restrictive in the vein of Final Fantasy, Breath of Fire 1 even allows for the game's main character to not be included in the main party at all. I mean, that seems like a trifling addition, but considering the amount of overlap between JRPGs at the time, it was little distinctions like this that more broadly defined a given series in the early 90s. Play this game. Daggerfall. No cover on that. Daggerfall! There we are. Now, I creamed my long johns over Daggerfall during my Elder Scrolls retrospective, so I'll not linger over much on this particular topic, alright? Daggerfall's primary merits lie in the sheer size and detail of its fully realized, if somewhat technically flawed, open world. It showed me years before Morrowind, and yes, years before Grand Theft Auto 3, that just because a story is there doesn't mean it has to dry hump the camera Angry Joe style and make everything about the fact that it merely exists. If you want to follow Daggerfall's main story, there's more than adequate incentive for doing so, but the game seems crafted for the singular purpose of inciting the player to aimlessly wander, explore, and customize. They want you to join the Dark Brotherhood and assassinate some bitches. They want you to pull one off to the digital nipples in the Chapel of Dibella. The game's RPG elements are incredibly robust. The approach to criminal justice, i.e. being able to protest your innocence in an actual trial or lie your balls off on the witness stand, is something that should have been included in the subsequent iterations of the series, and I remain utterly bewildered that it hasn't been. I mean, with all the pointless additions to Skyrim, from glowy trail spells to relationship and marriage options that have the depth of a jacuzzi, that something which would have genuinely enriched the game experience was once again left off the menu is nigh inexcusable. This is, without question, my favorite RPG of all time, and I'd be shocked and amazed if anything ever surpasses it. Well, no surprises here. From the massive, painstakingly detailed levels to the Jim Jonesian story, and even the extremely subtle manner by which said story is divulged to the player, Thief 2 has no shortage of virtues. The character models can be ugly as sin, sure. It wasn't exactly a digital Adonis even when it was first released in the year 2000, but when the upside is this unique variety of depth, how can you honestly hold that against it? The game patently refuses to hold your hand. Like an expert comic artist or a filmmaker, it encourages without outright forcing you to alter your pace so you're not leaving all the nuances and atmosphere in the dust. You can play this game 5 times in a row and find something brand new every single time, and I defy you to find a more realistic, tense, or atmospheric simulation of stealth on this fucking planet. It's one of the few games that once it's concluded leaves you feeling richer for the experience. It was the last game shipped by Looking Glass Studios before it all went tits up, but what a fucking swan song. I'm RazörFist, reminding you that opinions can't hurt you, God fucking speed.